Hey y'all, I just got hired to build my biggest sign yet. It's going to be 8 feet wide and 3 feet tall, and I'm going to vlog the whole process here for you. This is the design of the sign. It's for a local bowling alley here in Austin. I did a test cut a couple of days ago when I had my CNC down cutting out another project. Because it's such a big sign and because my CNC isn't very accurate, the middle of the sign was around 3/8 of an inch higher than the edges of the sign. Thankfully, my CNC is consistently inaccurate. Because of that, I should be able to adjust my SVG file that I'm using to cut out the sign in the opposite direction of the warp of the CNC, and it should cut evenly. We're going to test that assumption now. All right, let's get the CNC set up. All right, for those of you who have never seen this, here's a quick rundown on how it works. This is the sled. There's a router bit in this router that's attached to the sled. The sled moves via these chains that are on motors that spin, and it adjusts the chain to bring it left and right and up and down. There's also a motor right here that makes the router go in and out. It's all controlled by this thing back here, which is plugged in up there. I power it to the wall over here. I plug it directly into the outlet, and the shop vac runs up to here and is connected to this hole down there, and it sucks up all of the dust. Well, it tries to suck up some of the dust, but it doesn't get all of it. So that's the quick and dirty of how this works. All right, so I use ESOL to make my G-codes. I will export it to G-code. Probably should have named it, but I didn't. I go to Makerverse. Let's click Makerverse. The CNC is temperamental. Very temperamental. It makes a buzzing sound the entire time it's running too. So you hear that buzzing sound? That's that. I always get this error here, pretty much all the time. No idea why. I'll have to quit Makerverse from here. A lot of the times what we do is search it in here, and for whatever reason, that works for fixing it. Couldn't tell you why. So I'll turn it on, go into here, plug this in, reset this, scroll to the bottom, and it's working now. So we click upload the program, pick the one that it is, and we're ready to start cutting. Before I start cutting on the CNC, I always put on a dust mask and hearing protection. Next, I turn on the dust collector. Let's move this out of the way. Instant issue is that this is not supposed to cut right here, so I don't know why it didn't raise the blade. Maybe there's like a bubble there. I don't know. Probably gonna have to do another test cut just to make sure that that's good. All right, that's perfectly straight. I think this is plenty close enough, but I need to recut it and see if I can make that go away somehow. I'm not really sure what's causing that. I feel like it's probably just a glitch in the CNC, but I'm gonna try it again and see if it happens again. All right, so I flipped the board over and got it set up again. This time I'm going to cut it all the way through like it will be on the final product. All right, so we did another one. This one turned out pretty good. There's no weird line, so that's good that it fixed itself on that. That means we have a 50-50 shot of it happening again tomorrow, but we'll find out. It didn't cut all the way through on one side of most of these, which is annoying. The S was already messed up. That part's from the other side when I cut it out. But everything else turned out good, so time to cut out the other one. So I made a pretty big whoopsie. I unplugged my computer from the CNC while it was going home after cutting, and it messed everything up. And I reset it to 0 as best I could and made another test cut, and now it is cutting different than it was before during my other test cuts. So tomorrow I'm going to have to do it again and make different test cuts. Anyways, that's all for today. It's really late. It's 8:30. I'm going to clean up and go to bed. All right, we're all set up. If you saw yesterday's video, you saw that I did this cut yesterday and then I messed up my CNC, so now I have to do it all over again. Now I'm going to start up the CNC again and hope that everything goes good. All right, so it turned out way better than I thought it would. I think it's perfect. I'm going to run it through now on the real wood that I'm going to use. I'm going to change out the bit on this router so I can go with a fresh new sharp one, just to make sure everything goes as well as it can, and we'll do our first real cut instead of a test cut. So I have this issue with the CNC a lot where I'll set it to a depth and it'll cut twice as deep as what I set it to. I have no idea why it chooses sometimes to do that and sometimes not, but it did it on this one. So I'm going to go back into my software and divide everything in half and then export the file and do it again. Almost to the end and my router stopped working. It feels really hot. Maybe it's overheated. I'm not sure. I'm just going to let it cool off for a little bit and see if it starts working again. So this is where the brush is. It's supposed to be sticking out of that hole, but it's all the way deep down in there, held on by this spring that I'm pulling at right now. That's a spring. And it pushed that brush all the way down and it's burnt out. So I need new brushes for this. They do make them. I don't know if I can get them locally, but I guess I'm going to try to figure that out. My CNC takes up most of the garage, so I need to get this fixed today so I can park my van in here overnight. I don't want to move the CNC and mess up my cut, so I have to leave this here until I get the CNC working again. All right, I'm going to go run around town and see if I can find some replacement brushes, and hopefully I can get this fixed. I bought the router from Lowe's, so I'm going to check there first. All right, I struck out at Lowe's. I'm going to check out Northern Tool and see if they have something. I read on their thing that they do tool repairs, so maybe they do that and they have some. I've never been there before, so we'll check it out. All right, so I struck out at Granger, but I called someone who does tool repairs locally, and they said that they have something in stock. So I'm heading there now, and hopefully they have something. It would be awesome if they did. I hope they do. They had them. I'm so stoked. All right, I made it back. Let's put these brushes in. All right, in case you're wondering, this is the difference in size. This is what size they were to begin with, and then they wore down to here, and that's why they aren't working anymore. So I'm gonna put these ones back in. I'm gonna plug this back in and see if it works. Sounds like it's working. So I'm going to go in here, go to project, make a copy, it'll be the same thing. I'm gonna delete all of this so I can cut those two things out. All right, I got it all finished. It all cut out perfectly, and I'm super happy about that. I did spend the whole day running around trying to get the router fixed, but I'm happy how it turned out. All right, it's another new day, and today we are staining and sealing the sign. My process is gonna be to put on the pre-stain, the wood stain, the semi-gloss polyacrylic. I'm going to use the 3-inch brushes because they fit in the quart bottles, and then I'll use the 4-inch one and the gallon, and I'll wipe it off with my staining rags. The first step to staining is to lay down some places to stain. I also clean up my shop really well the night before so there's no dust. I decided to put some wax paper down where the letters are because the polyacrylic sticks to it less than the paper. I like using pre-stain when I stain pine because it gives it a more solid look. I stained the sign with a cherry stain because that is what the client requested, but when I went back and looked at the reference photos they sent me, they really wanted it to be more red, so I pulled an audible and restained it with a barn red stain. I let the stain soak in for about 15 minutes before wiping it down with a rag. The last step was to put on the semi-gloss polyacrylic top coat. I applied 2 coats using a rag. And here's the finished sign. The next step will be to add the lights. All right, it's lighting day for the sign, so I'm about to put the lights in. I keep all my stuff for my LED lights up in this bin. I also have a bunch of bags of new lights. Let's get them out. All right, so here are the new ones we ordered. We got yellow, orange, and blue to go behind the billiard balls. Then we got warm white for everything else. This right here is also warm white, so we'll use this up first before we open the other ones. Here are the tools I'll need. I made this little clamp to hold the pieces when I solder them. Here's my soldering iron. Here's several tools used to cut them. These are my wire strippers. They're automatic. I'll need a drill with a 1/4-inch bit to drill through the sign to put the wires through. I'll need heat shrink, super glue with an activator. Use this to clean the solder off my soldering iron. And this is the power cord that I'll use to plug in, and use these to test every piece to make sure that it's working before I glue it on. Here's my solder. I've had this for like 15 years from when I first learned how to solder. So, gonna use this and get started. These 3 circles are gonna be covered up with painted circles, but they're gonna have lights come out from underneath. And this first one's gonna be orange, this one's gonna be yellow, and this one's gonna be blue. So, I got the 3 colors here, and I'm gonna start with those and get those into place. I started by measuring and cutting the pieces out to size. If you see that line there, that's where we need to cut it. I like using these Knipex wire cutters to cut them. They cut it really nice. And I always go to the side of the line just a little bit so that I can have more to solder to. So I'm gonna solder to these 2 contacts that you can see right there. I'm gonna take my wire and cut just the littlest bit off the end and add a little bit of solder. I also added a little bit of solder to the contacts of the LED. Next, I'm gonna put this in my vise. Now I'm gonna solder these onto here. All right, now if I did my soldering right, when I touch these to these wires, it should light up. I was holding the wrong wires. I'm gonna drill a 1/4-inch hole through here, feed the wires through, and start super gluing it in place. I then repeated all those steps on the other 2 colors. And here's what they look like lit up. Next it was time to start on the Betsy's. I cut everything to size, soldered on the leads, and glued it into place. All right, I got all these little ones cut out and glued in. I don't know if you can see right there. If you cut out a little section in the middle, you can butt them up against each other and go around tight corners. So there's all one piece, but it's just been cut out in the middle to go against each other. Here's what it looks like when I cut it out. I usually cut out like a little triangle. If I make it a wider triangle, it can be a steeper angle, a more tighter angle, or sometimes I cut out a little less to make it less of an angle. This one would be about a 45-degree angle. And if you make a mistake and cut all the way through, then it doesn't work. So you have to make sure that you don't cut all the way through the back on this. I was able to do all of these, which is one piece each, but I think the rest of this, I don't want to do it all in one piece. So I'll probably break it up into several pieces and try to make it look as good as I can. I was actually able to do this all in one piece, and it ended up looking great. I then quickly wired it up to see how it would look, and it looked awesome. Alright, it's the next day. I'm going to show you how I installed my plexiglass into the sign. First, I cut out a spot for the LED backlit plexiglass that sits behind the billiards part of the sign to go. I then routed out a groove for the plexiglass to sit in. Next, I cut my back panel out to the same size using 1/4-inch plywood. Next, I need to cut some grooves for the wires from my LEDs to recess into. I measured my front panel with the wires and transferred those lines to the 3/4-inch sheet of plywood. Next, I used a 3/4-inch router bit and cut out the grooves. This is what the grooves look like after I cut them out, and here's the wires coming through them. This one right here is coming from underneath. I didn't want to cut that piece all the way apart, so it's just going to come out like that. Next, I used my circle cutting router jig to cut out circles that will represent the billiard balls on the sign. I needed 3, but I cut out 6 just in case. Next, I cut out some 3/4-inch plywood to use as spacers to allow the billiard balls to hover above the 3 different colored LEDs. I found the center of the blocks and then used a pin to align them with the center of the circles before gluing them together. Next, I sanded down the edges and filled in the center holes using some caulking. It was finally time to put on the first coat of paint on the back side. While the paint was drying, I got my wires soldered together. Then I put my piece of wood with the grooves cut out on it on top to make sure that it lined up, and it did. By the time I was done with that, it was time for the second coat of paint on the back side. Next, I started prepping the back side and the middle to put the acrylic pieces on. To do that, I put the top on top of the bottom and traced out the letters, and then transferred those lines to my center piece. Then I set up my table saw and started marking and cutting out the pieces to size. Here's what it looks like with the top piece on. All of the cut lines are behind the front of the sign, so you can't see them. I painted the part of the sign that will be behind the acrylic white, so that hopefully the LEDs will reflect better off of it. Next, I attached the frame to the front using glue and 23-gauge pin nails. I decided to go with this design so it would be easy to disassemble and that there would be no screws on the front of the sign. Next, it was time to paint the front side of the billiard balls. Here you can see how I'm attaching the frame of the sign to the side of the sign. I'm pre-drilling holes with a countersink bit and screwing them in using some brass screws. I then attached the back to the middle using the same 3/4-inch brass screws. Finally, it was time to install and wire up the LEDs that will go behind the acrylic sheets. I had to solder together 2 long strips to make it work. Next, it was time to set in the acrylic in the front of the sign to get a first look on how our sign will look. I added another coat of paint to the front of the billiard balls before I went to bed, and another one in the morning. Alright, so we are down to our final steps on the sign. I have it mostly built. There's just a few things left to do. I still need to finish up the wiring. I was hoping I could just use one plug and use some sort of converter. The lights on this are 24 volt and the lights on this are 12 volt. And I'm not able to figure out how to convert the 24 volt to the 12 volt to just run this all in one plug. So it's going to be 2 different plugs. I tried 4 different converters and none of them worked. So I'm going to have to finish up the wiring and just do 2 plugs. When I plug this in, the orange lights actually look red and the yellow lights look orange. So I'm going to switch these yellow lights over to the orange. And then I'm going to use these yellow lights, the warm white lights behind the yellow, and I think that'll make the lights look better. I also need to take the protective film off of the plexiglass and glue the inside letter parts down. So that's it, and then the sign will be finished. So let's get started on that. I actually decided to go with bright white, and I had some on my ceiling, so I cut a piece off and used that for my yellow billiard ball. I then found the center of each LED circle so that I could attach the billiard balls to the middle of them. Alright, this is going to be hard to film, but I'm going to attach these to the front of these. I have a pilot hole in the center here, and I have a pilot hole in the center of each of my holes for the lights. And so I'm going to put a drill bit through the back of my sign and into here, and that'll make sure that this is centered. Then I'm going to screw it in from the back and then pull the drill bit out, and then it should be centered. That's how it looks on the front. That hole's where I put the drill bit through, and then I just countersunk 2 screws into it to hold it into place. Now to do the same thing on these 2. Next, I took the protective film off of my acrylic pieces and made sure there was no dust on them. Next, I found the location for the inside parts of the letters and super glued them into place. Alright, I got everything buttoned up. Now it's just time for final assembly. I drilled a hole through the back for the wires to go through. The final step was attaching a French cleat to the back. The client helped me transport this to the store, but I helped him set it up, so let me show you how it looks all set up. Because of the lighting in here, it was a little bit difficult to capture how good it looks in real life, but it looks awesome in real life. So if you ever have the chance, go check it out at Betsy Billiards here in Austin, Texas.